This movie begins with Michael making a frantic call to his dad. He's been involved in something he regrets, so he drives around town, searching for a way out. Michael is a church minister. On a service day, he discusses the distinct roles of husbands and wives in the home and urges everyone to embrace their God-given roles. Later that evening, there's an outdoor dinner for church members. Michael displays affection to Elizabeth, and a lady can't help but wish her husband was like Michael. Elizabeth cautions her, telling her that everyone has their battles. Two young ladies walk by, and Elizabeth's son, Matthew, alongside his friends, makes remarks about the women. Elizabeth attempts to scold them, but Michael stops her. He says they have a right to admire God's creatures, claiming it's even biblical. This surprises Elizabeth. Michael makes things worse by using Elizabeth's age to make jest of her. Elizabeth immediately expresses her displeasure. Michael acknowledges it, but insists it was only a joke. The next day, Tanya takes her young daughter, Faith, to see Elizabeth. Faith has issues scoring good grades like she used to, but after talking to Faith, Elizabeth doesn't see any reason why her standards have lowered. Later that evening, Tanya and Faith are preparing a meal and having fun while at it. Derek, Tanya's husband, enters the kitchen. He's famished and wants to eat. The couple becomes lovey-dovey until Tanya mentions that she'll be meeting with her sister Grace that evening. Derek has an issue with that. This argument shifts the atmosphere in their home. Even when Tanya opts not to visit Grace again, Derek doesn't care. For him, Tanya can go do whatever she wants. At night, Faith can't sleep because of her parents' heightened argument and scuffle. So, Faith puts on earphones and plays music, restricting the raised voices. Michael comes home to Elizabeth. He complains that Elizabeth hasn't welcomed him the proper way a wife should welcome her husband. He says a wife must hug the husband and plant a kiss on his cheeks. Elizabeth explains, saying that she has too many chores to finish. Michael warns her, telling her that she shouldn't make excuses. Elizabeth brings up Tanya's home issues to Michael. She saw Tanya with a black eye earlier that day. Michael becomes defensive on Derek's behalf. He questions Tanya's ability to submit totally to Derek. He uses his understanding of the Bible to claim that Tanya has to bear with Derek, who's probably going through a rough period. This worries Elizabeth. Not necessarily Tanya's predicament, but Michael's school of thought. As Michael exits the house to get something, Elizabeth calmly sings a song. Michael then subtly tells Elizabeth that her voice is not fit for singing. Elizabeth wonders where the unnecessary bluntness is coming from. That same evening, Tanya hangs out with Grace and Coy. The conversation moves on, as Coy explains that his police officer husband usually comes home a different person. His work gets so intense that when he's home, he constantly yells and slams doors. Now with Grace and Tanya alone, Grace makes Tanya reveal what she's been going through in her home. Tanya explains the situation and wonders what she's been doing wrong. Grace strongly believes it's not her fault. Derek would always go off on Tanya anytime he's had a few beers, mixing up screams with slaps and punches. Grace wants it to end. Suddenly, Derek walks in with Faith. Grace and Derek's animosity brews silently. While Faith goes into her room, Derek asks Grace to excuse them. With Grace now upstairs, Derek hands over a gift to Tanya, apologizing for hitting her. Tanya makes him promise that he'll never hit her again, and he does. Derek, while still kneeling, opts to take her out. Derek and Tanya get cozy as they hit the fence floor at the club. Later that night, they have great sex at home. Michael is watching TV when Elizabeth rushes in. According to Michael's rules, his dinner should be on the table by 7 p.m. Elizabeth explains that a session with a client got extended. She also had a call with her mom that lasted an hour. Michael doesn't care about her excuses. He has a thing against Elizabeth's mom and even uses mean words on his mother-in-law. He's also concerned that Elizabeth didn't greet him the proper way he taught her. He reminds Elizabeth that it's almost 7 p.m. before going to wait at the dining table. Elizabeth finishes the meal and serves it. Michael mentions that she is 4 minutes late. He, however, goes ahead and eats, but notices that the steak hasn't been prepared the exact way he likes it. He reminds Elizabeth that the time spent talking with her mom is the reason she's messed up. Michael throws the meal on the floor, shattering the plate. He orders Elizabeth to clear the mess as he steps out. Derek is home from work and finds everything Tanya does annoying. Tanya's plan to let him be still backfires at her. Derek then seizes Tanya by the chin so hard and commands her to go get him another beer. Tanya is in shock, causing her to delay getting the beer. Derek then teaches her a lesson. The back of his is swift against Tanya's cheek, sending her to the floor. Derek continues hitting her, commanding her to go get him a bottle of beer while Tanya screams. After church service, Elizabeth meets Tanya, who has a black eye. She explains to Tanya that Derek has lost it and won't change. She's the one who'll make a change if she wants to keep herself together. Tanya argues that Derek is a good man who will change. She says she has no option but to be there for Derek in these trying times. Tanya has one question for Elizabeth. Would she leave if Michael beats her a few times? Elizabeth affirms she would, but Tanya counters it, stating that she's bluffing. At dinner, Mr. Jeffries, Michael's dad, has issues with Elizabeth's perceived high-handedness in his son's home. Elizabeth tries to subtly put him in his place. Michael then orders her to shut up and be a good woman, just like Mrs. Jeffries, who never argues. For Mr. Jeffries, men have the say, while women just follow orders. Funnily, Mr. Jeffries still acts very condescending towards Michael. As they do the dishes, Mrs. Jeffries encourages Elizabeth to be submissive to her husband. She says it's biblical. Even when Elizabeth mentions how rash Michael can be, Mrs. Jeffries holds that if Michael hasn't hit her, then things are fine between them. She goes on to praise Mr. Jeffries and Michael for being extremely nice people. With Mrs. Jeffries out of the kitchen, Michael insists that Elizabeth share details of their conversation. Elizabeth doesn't share, and Michael doesn't stop insisting. Michael even mentions to their son not to marry someone as disobedient as Elizabeth. Of course, this infuriates her. Faith and her friend Zoe play with toys in Derek's home. Tanya can't help but notice that Faith is reenacting the fight scenes between herself and Derek using the toys. When Zoe asks why Tanya uses sunglasses frequently, Faith lies, saying that Tanya is sensitive to light. At Michael's home, Michael apologizes for bringing in their son during the altercation. Elizabeth expects more apologies, but that's as much as Michael can give. He initiates sex, but Elizabeth declines. Michael warns her that good wives never deny their husband's sex. Michael goes ahead to forcefully have sex with Elizabeth. He continuously mentions how much he loves Elizabeth with every thrust, not ever minding Elizabeth's whimpering and cries. Derek is back from work with flowers to pacify Tanya, but Tanya isn't having it. She's more concerned that their fights are becoming normalized, and it's not good for Faith. Derek doesn't want Tanya to put up a resistance anytime he apologizes. The tension between them rises, and they have a scuffle that leaves Tanya gasping for air. Derek then locks her inside the room, pending the time she gets back to her senses. At night, Elizabeth sneaks from the bed into the bathroom to take some pills. Back at Derek's home, Officer Banks and Sergeant Strother pay a visit. Banks questions Tanya on whether Derek has been her, but she lies. Banks notices Tanya's demeanor and concludes that Tanya is a victim in his mind. Before they leave, Banks warns Derek to desist from doing the things that could have him in jail. With the policeman gone, Derek insists that Tanya's the lucky one because Tanya inflicted an injury on his face. With a cheeky smile, he promises not to press charges against Tanya. Elizabeth takes a while to exit the bathroom and Michael notices. When he enters the bathroom, he finds Elizabeth on the floor, unconscious. It looks like Elizabeth has overdosed on a certain pill. Michael then calls an ambulance, and in no time, they're at the hospital with Elizabeth still unconscious. With Tanya sleeping, Derek tearfully points a gun to her head, asking Tanya to reassure him she'd never leave him. Tanya goes on to reassure him in fear. At the hospital, Elizabeth is awake. Michael then begins scolding her for bringing embarrassment to him and the church. Elizabeth is mute until Minister Ross walks in. Minister Ross must see to the well-being of patients in the hospital. Ross notices that Elizabeth would need privacy for the conversation, so he asks Michael to please excuse them. Elizabeth then opens up about the incident the previous night. Ross advises that she takes care of her body because it's her duty. Michael enters, and Ross excuses them. He begins questioning Elizabeth on the details of her discussion with Ross, but she remains mute. Tanya meets Elizabeth in her office where complains about Derek. Elizabeth's advice remains the same: leave now that she's alive. Tanya doesn't know how to go about that, considering she has her daughter to take care of. Elizabeth hands her a card, a group of people who can help her escape Derek's hellhole. Meanwhile, Michael passes the office and notices the conversation between the two women. Tanya is back home and finds Derek cleaning his weapon. Derek immediately inquires from Faith about what Tanya spent her time doing in the church. He doesn't find Tanya wanting. He remarks how painful a bullet can be, then terms it a joke when Tanya gets scared. It's Michael and Elizabeth's wedding anniversary. Michael has a gift for her. She opens the gift and finds a book that teaches women how to become good wives. Michael is excited to be helping Elizabeth become the perfect wife, but Elizabeth is very disappointed. She laughs and then tosses the book aside. At Elizabeth's office, Michael and a member of staff are there to relieve Elizabeth of her job as a counselor in the church. They cite her attempt to take her life and advise Tanya to leave her marriage as reasons why she's been relieved. Michael then advises her to meet with a counselor and get her mental health in check. Tanya is home. She's making a meal when Derek comes in his usual demeaning tone. Tanya isn't having it this time. She has resolved to leave Derek. Derek once cheated and now has a son outside their marriage. That alone is a messed up situation. Also, Tanya is likely never going to conceive as she now has womb complications after one of Derek's manhandling. Derek promises to sort the situation and hopes they can start again. That evening, Michael enters his home and finds Elizabeth watching TV. He's surprised that his meal isn't being prepared and 7 p.m. is approaching. Elizabeth doesn't care anymore. She tells him that she's getting a divorce. Michael tries to make her see reasons why divorce isn't the only option. He tells her many things that suggest she might be crazy, but Elizabeth remains detached. The next day, Tanya is home when she receives a call that her husband has been detained at work, following a call from Elizabeth. Tanya is mad and goes to warn Elizabeth, telling her to stop going on errands she hasn't been sent on. Tanya is home and finds Derek in a dark spot holding his weapon. Derek scolds her for taking their marital affairs to Elizabeth. Tanya apologizes, and Derek calms her down, telling her all is well. He stands up to leave, before suddenly turning back to hit Tanya hard on her face with his gun. The case gets to the courtroom. The judge notes that Tanya has never pressed charges before now, hence Derek can't be slammed with heavy fines or even be jailed until a proper trial. Now separated, Derek still finds his way to Tanya in the wee hours of the night. He sends Faith upstairs and tries to forcefully ask Tanya to get back with him. Tanya reveals that she has no love left inside of her for Derek. This gets him very agitated. With Faith watching, he pounces on Tanya and chokes her till she's unconscious. The same night, Michael meets Elizabeth and requests a reconciliation. Elizabeth's refusal leads to a squabble that escalates. Michael also ends up choking Elizabeth till she's unconscious. With Derek supposedly gone, Tanya gets into her car with Faith and drives away from the house. Derek notices and begins a hot pursuit. He even shoots at Tanya's car, instilling fear in both Tanya and Faith. Tanya gets into an accident, crashing into Michael's car. Tanya sustains serious neck injuries, but Michael is barely hurt. Faith comes out of the scene unscathed. Meanwhile, Officer Banks arrests Derek.